Jasmine Porter adjusted the waistband of her leggings and took a deep breath before pushing open the doors to the gym. It was another long day of training clients, and she thrived on the energy of it, pushing people past their limits, watching them grow stronger, and knowing she played a role in their success. She glanced at her schedule on the tablet behind the front desk. Her last client of the evening was a new one, Jaxon Jennings. The name didn't ring a bell, but that wasn't uncommon. Plenty of people signed up for personal training without much background information. "Jasmine, your 7 o'clock is here," her coworker Mara called from across the gym. Jasmine turned her head and nearly did a double take. The man walking toward her looked like he belonged on the cover of a fitness magazine. Tall, broad shoulders, a sharp jawline, and piercing blue eyes that locked onto her with an intensity that sent a slight jolt down her spine. His dark hair was just slightly tousled, as though he hadn't bothered to fix it before coming in. She cleared her throat and pasted on her usual professional smile. "Jaxon, that's me," he said, his voice deep and smooth. "All right, let's get started. Have you worked with a trainer before?" She asked, grabbing her clipboard. "A couple of times," he admitted with a shrug, "but I travel a lot, so I've never been consistent." Jasmine nodded. "Well, consistency is key. We'll start with some basic strength training and mobility work, and then we'll build from there." She led him to the free weights, demonstrating the first set of movements. Jaxon followed her instructions without question, his form surprisingly solid. Most new clients struggled at first, but he was strong, really strong. "Are you sure you haven't been training on your own?" She asked, watching him move effortlessly through a set of deadlifts. He chuckled, setting the weights down with ease. "I stay active, but I could use some fine-tuning." Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that there was something different about him. He didn't carry himself like the usual business professionals or athletes she trained. There was an air of quiet confidence, like he was used to being in control. Still, she pushed the thought aside and focused on the session. Jaxon followed her lead, never complaining, never hesitating. When they finished, he grabbed a towel and wiped the sweat from his face. "You're relentless," he said, a teasing glint in his eyes. She smirked. "You hired me to push you, didn't you?" "That I did," he said, his gaze lingering on her a moment too long. Something about the way he looked at her made her stomach flip, but she quickly dismissed it. He was a client, and no matter how attractive he was, she never mixed business with pleasure. "Same time next week?" she asked. "Absolutely," Jaxon said, "but I think I'll book more sessions." "I like a challenge." Jasmine nodded, jotting it down in her schedule. As he walked away, she found herself watching him longer than she should have. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that Jaxon Jennings wasn't just some ordinary new client. He was a millionaire. And he was already falling for her. Jasmine wiped down the last of the equipment, her muscles pleasantly sore after a long day of training. She had worked with plenty of clients over the years, but Jaxon Jennings was unlike anyone she had ever encountered. His focus was sharp, his endurance impressive, and there was an undeniable air of authority about him, like a man who was used to getting exactly what he wanted. She told herself it didn't matter. He was just another client, nothing more. The following week, Jaxon arrived 5 minutes early, dressed in a sleek, fitted training shirt and athletic shorts. He leaned against the counter, watching her with an unreadable expression as she finished instructing another client. "You're punctual," she remarked, tossing her towel over her shoulder. "I make it a habit." His gaze flickered to the weights behind her. "I figured if I'm going to do this, I should go all in." She folded her arms. "Meaning?" "I booked sessions for the next 3 months. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "That's a big commitment." He held her stare without hesitation. "I don't do things halfway." There was something about the way he said it, unapologetic, unwavering, that sent a ripple of intrigue through her. But she quickly shoved it aside. "All right then," she said. "Let's see if you can handle what I have planned for today." The session was grueling, but Jaxon didn't falter. He pushed himself harder than before, sweat glistening on his skin as he powered through each set. Jasmine wasn't easily impressed, but watching him, she couldn't deny he had a relentless drive. By the time they finished, she handed him a water bottle. "You're improving fast," she admitted. He cracked open the bottle and took a slow sip, his eyes locked on hers. "You're a good trainer." She tilted her head slightly. "You sound surprised." Not surprised, he said, capping the bottle. Just impressed. For the first time, she allowed herself to really look at him. His posture was relaxed, but there was a quiet intensity in the way he carried himself. As if he was constantly calculating, observing. Before she could respond, Mara called her from across the gym, reminding her she had another client waiting. "I'll see you next time," Jaxon said, his voice smoother than it had any right to be. She nodded, turning away, but even as she walked off, she felt his eyes lingering on her. A month passed, and Jaxon remained unwavering in his dedication. He never missed a session, never slacked off. Each time, he showed up early and left only when she told him to. But it wasn't just his discipline that caught her attention. It was the way he listened not just to her instructions, but to her. One evening, nearing the end of a session, she found herself opening up more than usual. "I wasn't supposed to be a trainer," she admitted as he finished his last rep. Jaxon set the weights down and wiped his hands with a towel. "Oh," she exhaled, leaning against the bench. "I majored in sports medicine." Had this whole plan to work with elite athletes, but life had other ideas. He studied her carefully. "Regrets?" "Not really," she said. "I like helping people, seeing them change, get stronger." Jaxon nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Sounds like you found where you're meant to be." She blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in his voice. Most people brushed off her story, but he had actually listened. Before she could respond, a familiar voice interrupted them. "Jaxon?" Jasmine turned to see a sharply dressed man approaching, his tailored suit standing in stark contrast to the gym's casual environment. His eyes flicked between them, and then he grinned. "Didn't expect to see you here." Jackson's jaw tightened slightly. "Chris?" Jasmine observed the shift in his demeanor, still calm, but something had changed. Chris leaned in slightly. "You're hard to track down these days. Thought you'd be at the office." Jackson's fingers curled around his water bottle, his voice measured. "I have other priorities right now." Chris let out a short laugh. "Didn't take you for the fitness type." His gaze flickered to Jasmine, and something in his expression shifted. "Or maybe I see why now." Jackson's eyes darkened. "Enough." Chris raised his hands in mock surrender. All right, just checking in." He took a step back. "See you at the next board meeting." Jasmine watched as Chris walked away, her mind racing. Board meeting? She turned back to Jaxon. "What was that about?" he exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Nothing important," she frowned. "Jaxon, I should go," he said, grabbing his bag. "I'll see you next session." And just like that, he was gone. But Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that she had just glimpsed a part of him he didn't want her to see. Jasmine knew something was off the moment Jaxon walked into the gym for their next session. His usual easy confidence was still there, but there was an edge to him tonight, something subtle but unmistakable. His shoulders were tense, his jaw locked just a little too tightly. She didn't acknowledge it right away. Instead, she ran him through his warm-up, watching him closely as he moved through the motions. His form was perfect, but his focus was off. "You're distracted," she finally said as he finished his last set of lunges. Jaxon exhaled sharply, rolling his shoulders. Long day. She let the silence settle between them for a moment before deciding to push a little further. "Chris mentioned a board meeting. You never told me what you do." He lifted a dumbbell, adjusting his grip. "I own a few businesses." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "A few." He met her gaze, holding it as if assessing whether to say more. "Jennings Enterprises." The name hit her like a shockwave. Everyone had heard of Jennings Enterprises, a multi-million-dollar conglomerate with stakes in tech, real estate, and luxury brands. She had never paid attention to the names behind it, but now, standing here in front of her, was the man who apparently ran it all. She kept her expression neutral, refusing to react. "So, you're a CEO." "Something like that." She crossed her arms. "Why not tell me before?" Jaxon set the dumbbell down with controlled precision. "Because I didn't want that to be the first thing you knew about me." Jasmine considered that. It made sense in a way. People probably treated him differently the moment they found out who he was. She wasn't sure if she would have, but the fact that he had kept it from her made her wonder. "Does it change anything?" he asked. She held his gaze, searching for any sign that this was some kind of game to him, but there was nothing but honesty in his expression. "No," she finally said. "But it explains a lot." Something in his posture relaxed slightly, but the tension from earlier still lingered. She grabbed a kettlebell, handing it to him. "You're still finishing your workout." A corner of his mouth lifted just slightly, and for the first time since he walked in, some of the sharpness in his demeanor faded. Wouldn't expect anything less. The rest of the session went on with the same intensity as always, but there was a new undercurrent to it now. Jasmine was hyper-aware of him in a way she hadn't been before, not because of his wealth, but because of what it meant. Jaxon wasn't just another client. He was a man who carried the weight of an empire on his shoulders, yet he had chosen to come here, to train under her, to keep showing up week after week. And he wasn't doing it just for the workouts. The next evening, Jasmine was locking up when she noticed a sleek black car idling by the curb outside the gym. She frowned, stepping closer to get a better look. The tinted window lowered, revealing Jaxon in the driver's seat. "Need a ride?" she hesitated. "You don't even know where I'm going. Try me." She shook her head but walked toward the car anyway. "Jaxon, I can get home on my own." "I know you can," he said, his tone even, "but humor me." There was something in his expression that made refusing impossible. With a sigh, she slid into the passenger seat. The interior was as luxurious as she expected, the leather seats cool against her skin. Jaxon pulled into traffic smoothly, his hands steady on the wheel. They drove in comfortable silence for a moment before he finally spoke. "I know I dropped a lot on you yesterday. You think," he glanced at her, amusement flickering in his eyes. "I meant what I said. I didn't want to lead with my last name." She studied his profile, the sharp angles of his face illuminated by the city lights. "You didn't. But you also didn't tell me when you had the chance," he exhaled. "Would you have treated me differently?" Jasmine considered that. "Maybe, maybe not. I guess we'll never know." Jaxon didn't respond right away, as if weighing her words. Then he pulled up in front of her apartment building. She reached for the door handle, then paused. "Why me?" His brow furrowed. "What do you mean? You could train anywhere with anyone, but you came here, you stayed." Jaxon turned slightly in his seat, his gaze locking onto hers. "Because you don't care who I am. You push me the same way you push everyone else. You don't hold back." She swallowed, caught off guard by the honesty in his voice. "And because," he continued, his voice quieter now, "I like being around you." Jasmine's breath hitched, her fingers tightening on the door handle. She had spent weeks telling herself that whatever was happening between them was professional. But now, sitting here in his car with the city humming around them, she couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Something was happening between them, and she wasn't sure she could stop it. The air between them had shifted. Jasmine could feel it in every glance Jaxon sent her way, in the way his presence held a weight that hadn't been there before. Every session was charged with an energy she couldn't ignore, and neither could he. 2 months had passed since he first walked into the gym, and despite everything she now knew about him, he was still showing up, still pushing himself under her guidance, still looking at her like she was the only thing in the room that mattered. One evening, after an especially grueling session, they lingered near the weight racks longer than usual. The gym had emptied out, leaving only the hum of the overhead lights and the rhythmic pounding of rain against the windows. Jaxon rolled his shoulders, exhaling deeply. "I should probably go," he said, but he made no move to leave. Jasmine leaned against the bench press, arms crossed. "But you won't." He let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "No, I won't." She should have told him to go. Should have reminded him that this was professional, that she didn't blur lines with clients. But she didn't. Instead, she found herself holding his gaze, her pulse steady but deep, like the calm before a storm. "You never told me why you started training in the first place," she said, tilting her head slightly. "You weren't just looking for a hobby." Jaxon hesitated, then ran a hand through his hair. "No, I wasn't." Jasmine waited. He had been guarded about his life outside the gym, but she had learned that if she was patient, he would let her in, piece by piece. He exhaled slowly. "I needed something that wasn't work. Something that wasn't another deal, another boardroom, another negotiation." His eyes darkened slightly, his voice dropping lower. "I wanted something real, something I could build with my own hands." She hadn't expected that. "And you found it here." His lips parted slightly, as if he wasn't sure whether to say the next words aloud, but then he did. "I found you." Jasmine's breath caught. Jaxon took a step closer, his presence surrounding her. I know I shouldn't say that. I know you probably don't want to hear it, she swallowed. It's not that. Then tell me what it is. Her heart pounded as she searched for the right words. She had spent weeks telling herself this was nothing more than training, that whatever attraction simmered between them could be ignored. But standing here now, with the storm raging outside and Jaxon looking at her like she was something worth chasing, she couldn't lie to herself anymore. I don't know how to do this, she admitted softly. I don't know how to be part of your world. His expression softened and he reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. I don't want you to be part of my world. His voice was steady, sure. I want to be part of yours. A shiver ran through her, not from the cold but from the weight of his words. It won't be easy, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jaxon's grip on her hand tightened just slightly. Nothing worth having ever is. The distance between them disappeared in an instant. His lips met hers in a kiss that stole the breath straight from her lungs, and Jasmine felt herself sinking, drowning in him. She had spent her life building walls, keeping things simple, keeping people at arm's length. But Jaxon Jennings wasn't the kind of man who let things stay simple. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't want him to. Jasmine wasn't sure what to expect after that night. Kissing Jaxon had felt inevitable, like gravity had finally won, but the weight of it lingered long after they had parted ways. Would he show up to his next session as if nothing had changed? Would things shift between them in a way that made everything more complicated? She didn't have to wait long for an answer. The next evening, just as she was finishing up with a client, she spotted him near the entrance. He leaned casually against the wall, dressed in his usual athletic gear, but there was something different in the way he watched her. It wasn't just interest anymore, it was certainty. Jasmine approached him, keeping her tone even. You're early. Jaxon's lips curled slightly. Didn't feel like waiting. She ignored the way her pulse quickened and motioned toward the weights. Then let's get started. The session was intense, but Jaxon met every challenge without hesitation. He moved with a controlled power, his focus sharper than ever, but there was an unspoken energy between them, something neither of them acknowledged but both felt. When they finished, he grabbed his water bottle, his gaze steady on her. Come to dinner with me. Jasmine hesitated, wiping her hands on a towel. Jaxon, I'm not asking as a client, he interrupted. I'm asking as a man who wants to spend time with you outside this gym. She exhaled, searching his face. It's not that simple. It is, he countered. You're the one making it complicated. Jasmine folded her arms, trying to maintain some semblance of control. You have an entire life I know nothing about. Then let me show you, he said. If you don't like what you see, you can walk away, no pressure. She hated how tempting that offer sounded. Against her better judgment, she nodded. Jaxon's expression didn't change, but there was something victorious in his eyes. I'll pick you up at 8. Jasmine didn't argue. She just turned away, knowing full well there was no stopping whatever this was anymore. At precisely 8 o'clock, a sleek black car pulled up outside her apartment. Jaxon stepped out, dressed in a tailored jacket and dark dress shirt, the city lights reflecting off his watch. He looked effortlessly powerful, the kind of man who could command any room he entered. Jasmine had opted for something simple yet elegant, resisting the urge to overthink it. When she approached, he opened the car door for her without a word, his fingers grazing her hand just briefly as she slid inside. The restaurant he took her to was nothing short of breathtaking, an intimate rooftop venue with a panoramic view of the skyline. Soft lighting cast a golden glow over the terrace, and the sound of distant traffic blended with the quiet hum of conversation. As they were seated, she took in the atmosphere. You don't do anything halfway, do you? Jaxon leaned back in his chair, watching her. Not when it matters. She picked up her menu, scanning it before glancing at him. So, is this what your life is like all the time? Private reservations, exclusive venues. Sometimes, he admitted. But this isn't about impressing you with money, Jasmine. I just wanted a place where we could talk. She met his gaze, finding nothing but sincerity there. All right, she said. Then talk. Jaxon didn't hesitate. I wasn't always this person. Jennings Enterprises was my father's before it was mine. I grew up watching him build it, but I never wanted to take over. I had my own plans, my own ideas. What changed? He exhaled. He died, suddenly. And suddenly, I was in charge of something I wasn't sure I even wanted. Jasmine absorbed that, the weight of it settling between them. And now I make it my own, he said. But it's exhausting. It's why I came to you in the first place. I needed something that wasn't corporate meetings and financial reports. Jasmine tapped her fingers against the table. And you found that in training? I found that in you, Jaxon corrected. Her breath hitched slightly, but she didn't look away. You don't treat me like a CEO, he continued. You don't care about the money, the name. You just push me, make me better. That's rare in my world. Jasmine wasn't sure how to respond to that, so she didn't nod right away. Instead, she let the silence stretch between them, letting the depth of his words sink in. Finally, she spoke. I don't know what you want from me, Jaxon. His fingers brushed against the stem of his glass as he studied her. I want whatever you're willing to give. It was an honest answer. And it was enough. For the rest of the night, they talked not about business, not about training, but about everything in between. Childhood memories, places they wanted to visit, things they regretted. Each conversation unraveled another layer, and by the time Jaxon dropped her off at her apartment, everything felt different. When he walked her to her door, Jasmine hesitated before unlocking it. She turned to him, the city's glow casting shadows across his face. Tonight was. She trailed off, struggling to find the right word. Jaxon stepped closer, his voice lower. Real, she swallowed. Yeah, his hand lifted, brushing a stray curl from her face. I don't play games, Jasmine. If you're all in, I am too. The sincerity in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. After a long pause, she whispered, I don't know how to do this. Jaxon's fingers grazed her jaw, his touch feather-light. Then let me show you. And as she let him kiss her again, she realized she wanted to let him. Maybe, just maybe, she was ready to fall. Jasmine had never felt this kind of anticipation before. It was a slow, steady hum in her chest, a constant awareness of Jaxon in her life in a way that she had never let anyone be before. Days blended into weeks, and their relationship deepened with an intensity that caught her off guard. Jaxon didn't do anything halfway once he decided he wanted something. He pursued it with unwavering focus. And right now, that something was her. She wasn't used to being pursued. She was used to standing on her own, relying on herself, making things happen without expecting anyone to catch her if she fell. But Jaxon was proving, again and again, that he wasn't going anywhere. One evening, after closing the gym, she found him waiting for her outside, leaning against his car as if he had all the time in the world. It had started to become a habit of his showing up when she least expected him, making it impossible to pretend he wasn't becoming a part of her routine. Jasmine stopped in front of him, crossing her arms. You know you don't have to do this every night. His expression remained unreadable, but there was a hint of something in his eyes, something firm, unshakable. And yet, here I am. She let out a breath, shaking her head. You're impossible. Jaxon stepped closer, his voice lower now. You're the one who makes it impossible to stay away. The way he said it, so effortlessly, so certain, made her heart stumble, but she refused to let him see how much he affected her. You've had a long day, he continued. Let me take you somewhere. Jasmine hesitated, but he was already opening the car door for her, waiting. She could refuse, could insist on keeping things at a slow, cautious pace. But the truth was, she didn't want to. She slid into the car. Jaxon drove through the city, the skyline stretching out in front of them, glittering against the dark sky. He didn't tell her where they were going, and she didn't ask. There was something thrilling about letting herself be surprised. When he finally pulled into a secluded entrance, Jasmine realized they were near the waterfront. A private dock stretched out over the water, and a sleek yacht was moored at the end. She turned to him, raising an eyebrow. You own a yacht. Jaxon's mouth twitched, amused. It's not just a yacht. It's where I go when I need to think, when I need to be away from everything. Jasmine followed him up the walkway, stepping onto the deck. The soft glow of lanterns illuminated the space, casting warm light across the plush seating and polished wood. The gentle sway of the water beneath them was soothing, the air crisp with salt and the faintest hint of rain in the distance. This is, She trailed off, unsure how to describe it. Peaceful, Jaxon finished for her. He poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to her before settling onto one of the cushioned benches. Jasmine hesitated only for a moment before sitting beside him, the space between them almost non-existent. "You really don't stop, do you?" she murmured, swirling the liquid in her glass. Jaxon glanced at her. "Stop what?" "Finding new ways to make me let my guard down." His expression turned serious. "I don't want you to have to keep your guard up around me." Jasmine let out a slow breath. "That's not how I work. I've always had to be the one in control, the one making sure everything stays together." Jaxon set his glass down and turned fully toward her. "You don't have to do that with me." She looked away, focusing on the water. "It's not that easy." "I know." His voice was steady, unwavering. "But I'll prove it to you every day for as long as it takes." Jasmine's heart clenched at the quiet sincerity in his words. He wasn't just saying things to win her over. He meant them. She turned back to him, her fingers tightening around her glass. "And what if I never stop being cautious?" Jaxon reached out, his fingers brushing against hers, warm and grounding. "Then I'll wait, because you're worth it." Something inside her cracked, not in a way that hurt, but in a way that felt like she was finally letting in the light. Without thinking, she leaned in, pressing her lips to his. It wasn't the hurried, stolen kiss from before. It was deeper, slower, filled with something she wasn't ready to name but couldn't deny. Jaxon responded immediately, his hand cupping the back of her neck, pulling her closer. The world outside the yacht, outside this moment, ceased to exist. And for the first time in a long time, Jasmine let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to do everything alone. Months later, Jasmine stood in the middle of the gym, watching as the last of the clients filtered out. She had built this place with her own hands, had poured everything into it. But now, there was something different about her life, something she had never expected. Jaxon was standing near the entrance, watching her with that same unwavering focus he always had. But tonight, there was something else in his expression. She walked up to him, tilting her head. "You look like you have something to say." Jaxon reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Jasmine's breath caught. He opened it, revealing a stunning ring, the diamond catching the light in a way that made her heart hammer against her ribs. "I told you I don't do anything halfway," Jaxon said. "So when I say I want forever with you, I mean it." Jasmine's throat tightened, emotions crashing over her like a tidal wave. Jaxon held her gaze. "Marry me." The simplicity of the words made them even more powerful. Jasmine didn't hesitate. "Yes." Jaxon slipped the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms, holding her as if he would never let go. And she knew, without a doubt, that he never would. The gym, the city, the world around them faded as she kissed him, sealing a promise that had been written in the way he had looked at her from the very beginning. He had always known, and now so did she. Forever had never felt so certain.